Hi, I'm Joe, and you're watching and Joke. I made a hex node, and I'm going to continue explaining how it works. This is part 2, drawing a hexagon. Okay, now that we have the points of the hexagon, we need to move on to drawing the rest of the hexagon. And for that, we're going to be using a node that I kind of made a bit too early, the magnitude node. With the magnitude node, we're going to be making another math node known as the, let me get my notes here. Whoops, I accidentally grouped it. Let me get my notes. We're going to be making a node known as the angle between lines node. Should technically be the angle between two vectors, but that's too long. This will be a vector maths node, so let's pull in vector math. Using this vector math node, we're going to get the dot product of two vectors that will be given to us. We're also going to get the magnitude of those two vectors. And with that, we'll be able to use the angle between two lines equation, which I'll post up on the screen right here. You'll see why this is important later. So now that we have that, we're going back to our normal math node. Multiply the two magnitudes. Divide the dot products of both of those magnitudes by, divide the dot product of both of those vectors by the magnitude of those vectors multiplied. Then we will take the arc cosine. I used to call it inverse cosine because written down it just looks like inverse cosine, you know. So we're going to take the arc cosine of this multiplied value, and that should give us the angle between two vectors. And like I stated before, I prefer my angles in degrees, so we're going to convert from radians to degrees, because all programmed math usually uses radians. So let's convert that to degrees, and our output, we're going to send it through another node I may have made a bit too early, the acute node. We can now group this entire node, and that will be the angle between two vectors we need for the hexagon. We are doing the acute because we need the smaller out of the two angles that you could get. You could get the outer angle or you could get the inner angle. Mathematically, you should usually get the inner angle, but this is just a precaution. So with that, we now just need to set up the inputs and the outputs. We're going to have two vector inputs, the angle between two vectors. These are the two vectors. And we're going to have its output. I'm going to call that acute angle, just so I can match the documentation. And these vectors, vector A and vector B. That one is different from the documentation, but that's just so we can clearly understand what's happening. Now that we have that, we can name it angle between lines. Actually, you know what? Angle between vectors. I don't know why I never thought of that. Definitely spelled that wrong. Vectors. Vectors. protect that because we're literally going to use it right now. Okay, so now that we have the angle between two vectors node, or the angle between vectors node, we'll be able to use it to draw out the rest of our hexagon. So using this angle between two vectors, we're going to need to duplicate it. Duplicate it again, select these three, duplicate one more time. Then we can push this off to the side for a bit. Now we're going to need to how should I explain this? Okay, now that we have our 6 angle between lines, we're going to need to check if a given UV point, meaning a point anywhere on this plane, is within the hexagon. To do that, we're going to a lot of math. I'll explain as we go along. So we're going to do some vector maths. We're going to need the vector math node. With this node, we're going to be creating some lines through subtraction. Now, because I do not currently have some other thing with UV in it, I'm going to be using the UV map node right here. I'll hit the divide or slash symbol on the numpad and get this router. And now using this router, this may take a bit. I'll demonstrate with this one and then speed up the video. So we want to feed this UV node into our second vector. And then use hex point A to our first vector over here. This creates a line between a given UV coordinates and the point A of our single hexagon. I'll duplicate this and repeat it for point B. I'll then compare the angle between these two vectors and leave that for now. I'm going to repeat this process with the rest of these points, but the video will be sped up. Hopefully you'll be able to replicate it. Just make sure you're correctly connecting everything. So with that, let's speed up the video. Okay, so I had to switch to the node tab to connect all of these, but hopefully you guys could follow along with the pattern. We have UV to, this one is UV point A, this one is UV point B, this one is also UV point B, UV point C, UV point C, UV point D, UV point D, UV point E, UV point E, UV point F, UV point F, UV point A. So hopefully you can see we're doing AB, BC, CD, DE, EF, FA. We're just going around the hexagon and making sure we get every UV to line comparison we can. So now with all these comparators, we need to now determine, well, is the point we're looking for within the hexagon? And how do we do that? Well, first we need to add all these values together. So let's pick up our math nodes. This will be extensive. Let's see, according to this, there are 3, move this here, should be 1 more, and then hook them up so we can add all the angles together. Now, the results of all this should be, I want to say less than, the result of all this should be less than 360. It should be less than or equal to. So what we're going to use to actually determine if this is less than or equal to is another math node. And this is a math node we have not created yet. So, quick aside to make this math node the greater than or less than node. No, sorry, greater than or equal to node. I always mess that up, I don't know why. It's in my head, it's just like greater than or less than, greater than or less than. I guess they're opposites. I'm stalling as I'm scrolling. Okay, here we go. The greater than or equal to node is comprised of 3 math nodes. 1 add node, 1 greater than node, and 1 compare so we can have our equal to kind of node. This compare will have an epsilon of 0. We will give it no leniency. And if we add all these up, in the documentation, I forgot to clamp this between 0 and 1. It should be clamped. And then we're going to output our value. I just realized there were some errors that I was getting when I made this originally. That may be because I didn't clamp the value. Fascinating. Let's see if that's right. We're going to group this, and we need to feed in our value to these 2 spots and our threshold to these 2 spots. Then our output should be between 0 and 1 and to give us, well, whether a value is greater than or less than this threshold. So we can go out of node, name this greater than or less, nope, equal to, I keep messing that up, equal to, and save that because we're definitely going to use it later. So now that we have our value here, we can check it against 360. If it is greater than 360, this should return a 1. Well, greater than or equal to. I'm now trying to determine if it's better for, it's supposed to be equal to 360 degrees. So if it's greater than or equal to 360 degrees, it should output 1, and we should have drawn our entire hexagon. Let's make sure that's right. So what we're going to do is add in a color ramp just to check our math. We're going to output the color here, and we'll go into the shadings tab to see our results. Oof, okay. That's not right. I was at least expecting a hexagon. Change the clamp value, does nothing. Okay, give me a moment. We'll cut back when I've actually determined the issue.
A few moments later.
Okay, I figured out what went wrong. Within the angle between two vectors node, I forgot to set this to divide. So if you set that to divide, we now get that.
Many hours later.
Okay. It took an insane amount of time to find this. This is like a warning. I don't know what to call it. Warning, cautionary tale, either way. Make sure that these are correctly connected. Otherwise, the line is pointing in the wrong direction. So, the UV goes first, followed by your hex points. At which point, we get the exact results I was looking for. Now, yes, this does look like a doily. Doily is the accurate term. Yeah, doily, you know. Doilies. But that is what I'm looking for. I have no idea how mathematically this would properly be fixed. I do have a workaround that I made. Now, in that hex website, the hex grid website, it does inform you of the inner and outer circle of a hexagon. So, if we also draw the inner circle of a hexagon, it will cover up this remaining area. So the inner circle, pretty simple equation. Let me just go through it real fast. First, we're going to use a combine XYZ node. I was going to say specifically what we're going to combine, but it's easier just to have the XYZ node in there first. Then, wow, the program's lagging so much. I think it's just running OBS and these many nodes in Blender. Either way, we take we don't have it here. We don't have it here. So we need the offset. We already know what the offset is. We will have a node later that is going to calculate us a new offset, but for this example specifically, I'm just going to use the offset of 0.5, 0.5. So we'll enter 0.5. So the X offset, Y offsets. Those will not be fixed values. Those will be recalculated later. But for this example specifically, I will just need to add them in. So yet again, inner circle, super simple. As soon as you have all the data you need. Okay, next we need a vector math node. And we're going to calculate the distance between two vectors. The vector we're going to calculate is a given vector, which in this case would be the UVs. In the diagram, I did not name it, and that is my fault. I apologize. So we're going to get the distance between the UV and the offset. Making sure we have them. This should actually not matter, but just in case, just like all of this, subtraction matters, addition usually doesn't, multiplication does, which means dot product. There's a lot of things you need to just remember when you're doing math. But for now, let's attach them like they are in the diagram. So we have the UV going into the distance vector. We're checking the distance between the UV point or the UV vector and the offset vector. This gives us the distance a point is away from the center, essentially. Because UV is just any point here, and the offset tells us where our center is. Following that, we need now a normal math node. So that we can do some division. So divide, and we're going to be dividing the offset. Nope, we're dividing the height. Got that wrong entirely. At least the height we have, it's right here. I'm just double checking this. My documentation, not the greatest. However, it should work. So we're dividing the height in half. The height of the hexagon being from this point up here to this point down here. So dividing that in half. We will get half the height of the hexagon. Now we take that and we're going to put it into a less than or equal to comparator. So because it is less than or equal to, we can actually just go into the greater than and equal to and copy this. I don't use less than or equal to again. Whoops, clipboard empty. Guess it didn't copy. I don't use less than or equal to again, so that's probably why I didn't make a note for it. Well, we're just gonna compare these two values, so boom, boom, and boom, boom. So the reason we're doing this is that we're trying to create an inner circle. The radius of that circle is half the height. So from this center point to this point right here. Then we're going to compare every UV point to see if its distance is equal to that. Its distance away from the center is equal to that. Well, less than or equal to. So if it's equal to that, it will be on the edge of the circle. When you really say edge, it will be on the edge of the circle. If it is less than, it will be inside the circle. So that should fill out every other point that we need. This should actually just be clamped since it will be a value. We just need that value to be 1. So now that we have this, I can actually select all that and group it. We're gonna set up all the inputs and outputs right now. It has a single output telling us if it is in the inner circle. These values will not be fixed, so we're going to add a point for the X offset and a point for the Y offset. Name them as such, offset X. And offset Y. Unlike my diagram, I'm actually going to be naming this. This one is UV. And this one is height. Organize those properly, and we are out of here. So now that I have the UV, no, not the UV compare, I don't know why I said that. Now that I have the inner circle check, we're going to first name it inner circle. Enter. Then we're going to add these two values. And to do that, we just need a simple math node. Then if we output this value, you will see a perfect hexagon. Exactly. Granted, this should be clamped so we don't have any over brightness of any particular area. And there you go. We have the perfect hexagon. All of this now can be considered from the vector subtractions to the final addition is now our next node. This node I dubbed the hex drawer because it draws the hexagon. This generates a hexagon, this draws it. Very simple. There are a few points missing here that you will notice in the documentation. Those points that we're missing currently are the offsets, because yet again, those will be recalculated values. So we're just going to attach that here and attach that here. And just so it can properly mirror the documentation, we're going to move the height to the bottom. Then we're going to rename all these to their correct names, which in our case is hex point A, B, C, you know. So after creating all the vector points, you do need to go out and check that they're correctly named and correctly lined up. As I've found here, these are not correctly positioned. So let's reposition them and rename them. This needs to travel to the top. And now needs to take the moniker of A, and everything else below it needs to go one down. Actually, let me fix everything else first. How do I fix this everything else first? Okay. Yeah, I messed up not checking the points beforehand. So that's going to be F now. Hopefully it doesn't change it to F.1. And this one's going to be A. So forth and so on. Okay, so with that settled, we now have all the components to properly draw a hexagon. Our next step will now be, well, making this hexagon into a grid.
Okay, so there we have it. We have finished part 2, drawing the hexagon. Next, we'll finish up the whole project by drawing the grid. If you like this video, please check out the last video in this project right here to the left. And if you just want to see what I've been working on art-wise, please click up here to the right where I have a playlist full of it. And if you want to catch the next installment of this series, please hit that notification bell and subscribe for more. Thanks for watching, and joke out!